Western civilization, political, economic, and social thought. And what I'm going to do today is introduce you to the course, tell you a little bit about it, tell you its purpose, what we're going to try to derive from it, and at the end talk about some of the procedures. And by the way, one of the things I'll do every time I come in is write an outline of the lecture on the board. The reason for this is pretty simple. If you have that, you don't have to spend your time just taking notes. You can think and listen. And that's one of the better things to do, because this is a think course, if there ever was one. So, well, ILS 205 and 206 are part of the Integrated Liberal Studies program at Wisconsin, which is something of a liberal arts college within the university. Many of you will be taking a variety of courses in ILS, and the whole idea of this is to relate together the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities into what you might call a classic liberal arts curriculum. Now, the courses are not only related internally. For example, this course takes up politics, economics, and philosophy, but they're related one to the other. So many of you are also taking the Western culture course in science and technology, in the humanities, in arts, literature, and architecture. And within this course, as we go along, we're going to be drawing a lot of parallels between what happened in the history of political and economic and social thought and what happened in scientific thought. And we'll see this develop as we go along. And you'll also be drawing analogies to the world of art and literature and culture in the civilizations that we deal with. Well, it's a year course in the development of Western political and economic thought. And the idea behind it, I suppose, basically is this. We are a peculiar people. We think in terms of a liberal democratic civilization. We have a free enterprise economy that we contrast to socialist or Marxist economies or other forms of life. We believe, without half thinking about it, that the purpose of society should be to serve the individual. We believe, without half thinking about it, that people have rights that they can express and that it should be invested in law. These things we talk about in our daily life, and they become part of our common inheritance of ideas and our common mode of expressing our political thoughts. And yet, these ideas have an ancient ancestry, and part of what our purpose in this course will be is to trace out that ancestry, in effect to try to understand why we think about society the way we do, in this most peculiar, most complex, most troublesome and problematic and very curious way that we do. Now, we begin the course in ancient prehistory, in the misty worlds of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia and ancient Israel. And we do that really just to set the stage, to get started. We'll just talk about that for one day next time. Now, this ancient world, long before Christ, long before philosophy, is a world we know only from fragments. And the ways of thinking of these civilizations we don't understand too clearly, but we know they were very different from our own. But even the small glimpse that we'll have of these civilizations and how they thought about the relationship of God and man, the universe, and human society introduces a very central theme that we're going to be exploring all through the course. Because people have, from even prehistoric times, asked a very curious question. They've asked, what is the order of the universe? And once they've asked that question, they've said, and given the order of the universe, how should we understand the order of human affairs? People have moved from their understanding of science to their understanding of politics and economics all the time. We'll see that theme reiterated all through the ages. First one asks, what is the will of God? And then one asks, therefore, how should we organize our lives together? How should we conduct ourselves politically, ethically, and economically? Or one asks, what is true about the nature of the universe? And from that, we derive theories about society and about ethics and about the correct conduct of human affairs. So we'll be watching that process. That's the link between science, religion, and politics and economics that we'll be following all through the course. And we'll see that as people's ideas of science change, as people's ideas of ultimate reality change, that their ideas about politics and economics and society change as well. And in that way, we begin to see how the scientific events of an age, the religious events of an age, almost in a very strange way determine one's political outlook. Well, that's too strong. They don't determine it. They suggest a political outlook. Well, that will do just one day on Thursday. We're going to take you through 3 civilizations, about 1,000 years of history. Your minds will be reeling quite a bit. Now, Thursday, don't try to learn everything. Just sit back, relax, let it flow over you, because you're just trying to get a perspective for when we focus in on classic Greece. And there we're going to dwell for a while. Our tour will stop for about 5 weeks in ancient Athens, and at that time we'll see the civilization which really has remarkable links to our present time and our present way of life. Because the ancient Greeks really set up and defined the intellectual problem of modern society. As we'll see, 20th century scientists, philosophers, economists are still trying to answer many of the questions raised by Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. And so we'll look at the life of this very unusual community, and we'll study Plato and we'll study Aristotle in some detail. Then we'll watch Athens kind of fall, and with it Rome begins to rise on the horizon as the central civilization and the seedbed of Western ideas. And oddly enough, we won't look directly at Rome, at the center, at what was happening in the city of Rome at first, because the great intellectual creativity took place in the borderlands. It took place for a second time in Greece with the development of Stoic thought and Epicurean thought, what we call Hellenistic thought, after the golden age of Athens was over, after Athens had really become part or a protectorate of the Roman Empire. And we'll also look at the rise of Christianity, which also occurs in the context of imperial Rome. So Hellenistic thought, Christianity become the next big seedbed of ideas that we'll study. And we'll watch how they influence Rome, then we'll take up and we'll study Rome and see, actually, Rome wasn't built in a day. We will study Rome in a day, which is kind of a complicated thing to do. But we'll watch Rome as the transmitter of these ancient ideas, the organizer of them, the formulator of them, and the one that passes them on to other civilizations. Well, Rome falls, as you know, and Rome disappears, and we will take a move through the Dark Ages, about 600, 800 years when learning and knowledge and understanding disappear from the human scene. And then we'll watch one of the most remarkable episodes ever that I can imagine, the rediscovery of knowledge, the piecing together of Aristotle and Christianity, the discovery of fragments of their thought in libraries here and there. And between 800 and 1100 AD in the universities of Western Europe, there's a long period when people put together the knowledge of the West again. And ancient Greece, which looked like it had disappeared from the scene, and Christianity, which has had a very peculiar, the whole Judeo-Christian tradition, which has had a very peculiar voyage through the time of ancient Rome, now come together to form the high civilization of the Middle Ages. Well, we'll look at medieval political thought and medieval political culture for a few weeks, for a number of reasons. The first is that in the Middle Ages, probably for the only time in human history, people achieved something of a comprehensive view in which religion, science, society, ethics, politics, and economics all fit together. For the people who were aware, who were self-conscious in the Middle Ages, there was an enormous comfortingness about the way they understood the world. See, we live in a world of clashes of ideas. We call it a pluralistic world of ideas. And I think you do it yourself. You can't quite put all your ideas together. You live in one world religiously, one world scientifically, one world in terms of literature, one world in terms of ethics. And if someone asked you, what your scientific understanding, what you learn in a math class, has to do with what you do on Sunday or Saturday in the synagogue or the church, well, you'd say those are really two different things. And you learn to isolate those two experiences, one from the other. You know you're not supposed to put down in a math examination things that you learned in Sunday school. And you know, on the other hand, that it's utterly inappropriate to put to go into Sunday school and start quoting from your economics teacher. That these things just don't fit together. John Kenneth Galbraith, the great economist, once talked about when he was teaching at California school, he had a student who was a Christian, fundamentalist Christian, and he asked the perfectly good economist's question on a final exam, what is money? And the student answered, money is the root of all evil. Now, it might have been a pretty good answer from the point of view of the student's religious orientation, but it made no sense in terms of economics at all. Now, you've gotten used to this. You've learned to live in a world where ideas, that the parts of your understanding don't add up. But the Middle Ages didn't think that way. They thought everything went together. And for one brief moment, I'd like you to glimpse that mind of the Middle Ages so that you can see what it would look like if everything hung together. Medieval scholasticism is as close to a universal theory as people have had. The only parallel is really the impact of scientific understanding on the world of our age, and how significantly we think that everything can be done scientifically, so that we have scientific approaches to the study of literature. We have this thing called political science, and in which we honor scientific understanding as the highest form of understanding. Well, one reason we'll study the Middle Ages is to get that glimpse of this totally coherent system of knowledge. The other reason is that we live in an age of revolution. We know that our ideas were taking objection. The rise of democracy, the rise of capitalism, the rise of liberalism in all of its form was in rebellion and in objection to some older system of thought. To understand your own civilization in a way, you have to understand what it was created against. And it was created against the mind of the Middle Ages. Well, we'll watch toward the end of this semester then the collapse of the medieval synthesis. And it gets hit in about 20 years, between about 1500 and 1550, from three sides. First, it gets hit by the Protestant Reformation. Luther claims that the underpinnings of Catholic theology in the Middle Ages don't make sense, and the politics and economics that follow from it don't make any sense either. The second source of objection to the downfall of the medieval synthesis is the Renaissance, the great age in which the Italian city-states particularly also take exception to this medieval view of science and religion and go back to a classical humanism, a faith in man and man's works and man's capacities. And this also is a blow at the mind of the Middle Ages. And we'll see that represented by Machiavelli, Niccolò Machiavelli, the author of the first realistic theory of politics and economics. And the third great blow to the medieval worldview was the scientific revolution. Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, between them, took apart the scientific foundations of this. Well, at the end, Luther and the Protestant Reformation had caused doubt to be cast on the religious integrity of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance on its civilization, the scientific revolution on its understanding of the universe. And at the end of the first semester, effectively, we'll see a world in collapse. Well, the second semester then begins with the effort of Western men to reconstruct thought anew from the beginnings. And so what we do in the second semester is take up the gradual discovery, piece by piece, of our civilization, the coming first of the new science, Descartes and Newton, and then the political scientists and economists who followed from it, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who created this most interesting way of thinking of the world that gives us the foundation philosophy of liberal democracy. Then we'll watch the articulation of these ideas, the development of the theory of capitalism. We'll read Adam Smith, and later on John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, those who developed the economic side of this reasoning. About halfway through the semester, we'll study Karl Marx and Marxism. Now, from your point of view, as Americans, Marx and Marxism represent the other side of the argument. They represent something that stands opposed to liberal democracy. But as we'll see, if you look at it in this longer tradition of the evolution of Western ideas, Marx and Marxism are really not, they're really part of the conversation. They're not something antithetical to liberal democracy. They're absolutely in communication. It's a schism or a heresy, you might say. But one of the things you'll find, to your utter amazement, is how many of the ideas of Marx and the Marxist tradition are simply part of our everyday understanding of the world and how it operates. Marx is not so exceptional. Then finally, somewhere next spring, we will come to our century, our time, our civilization. We'll study the American pragmatists, John Dewey. We'll study John Maynard Keynes, the formulator of the economic doctrine that until most recent years has pretty much dominated the way we think about the role of the state in relation to the economy. And as we complete the series, we'll look at our own time and our own place, the arguments we have with one another, liberals versus conservatives, Republicans versus Democrats, and how these arguments go back and reflect so many of these ancient understandings. Now, as I say, it's a year-long course. You're welcome to take either semester for credit, though I've never understood how that works out. I mean, it's like leaving a movie in midstream. If you take the first semester, you watch the collapse of the Middle Ages and you don't quite know how it comes out. Or you can come in the second semester. You can take the second semester alone, in which case you haven't seen the first half of the movie, and so you don't know quite how the story works out. You can even take the semesters in reverse order if you want to. And I've always wondered what that does to the human mind. I mean, if you sort of learn up through, the Middle Ages second, and then you go back, and well, anyway, I don't know how that works. Now, but as I say, don't feel that you have to sign on for the entire year. You can take the course for credit, but it is designed, like all the ILS Western Culture courses, as a complete series. Now, the theme of the course is about political economy, the relationship of politics and economics. But in the first semester, we will be talking mainly about political theory, and there's a very good reason for this. Politics and economics do not really become separate disciplines or ways of understanding the world until the modern period. You'll see a little bit of economics in Aristotle, but not very much. So we'll talk mainly about political thought and political ideas the first semester. Then in the second semester, you'll see the idea of political economy emerge fully in the modern period. And often in the modern period, as you'll see, economic thought dominates and political thought follows from that understanding. But the relationship of the two disciplines, of politics and economics, will just grow on you gradually over time. Now, this whole course, of course, covers a vast sweep of history. 2,300 years to be exact, not counting the prehistory that we'll deal with very, very briefly on Thursday. We begin seriously about 450 BC, and we move to 1500 AD in the first semester alone. Now, that's 1,900 years, yes, indeed. That's something at the rate of a little bit over 120 years a day. Now, obviously, we're not going to consider everything, and obviously, you're not going to emerge from this with the sense that you understand the history of Western civilization. We are talking about ideas, the development of ideas. We'll talk about it in relation to history, but you won't always have that sense that you fully are getting a history course. Don't think of it as a history course. It's not that at all. Now, and we're going to skip around a lot. We're talking only about those episodes in Western history that are still alive, that still make a difference, that still are part of our own mind and our own time. Those works and those ideas that have had a lasting impact on Western civilization. So while at some points we'll kind of travel through epochs and characterize the thought or the mind of a whole epoch, we'll focus on particular figures. And in the first semesters, we are really focusing on 8 great writers. 2 Athenians, Plato and Aristotle. 2 Christians, Jesus and St. Paul. 2 fathers of the Catholic Church, St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, and then the fathers of the Reformation and the Renaissance, Luther, and Niccolo Machiavelli. And those 8 people are the people whose work you will get to know very well indeed. Now, that sketches the idea of the course and what we will study. But there's a larger question in mind, which is, what is the purpose of such a course? Why should one study this? Obviously, we're not just telling the story of 2,300 years of time. I suppose the first way I'd put the idea of the purpose behind the course is that this is the study of the common language and the common conversation of the Western mind and of Western people. This is the study of the great books and the great ideas. This is the foundation of a liberal arts education. Every time somebody comes up with a list of the 30 or 50 great books in the world, you'll find that the books that we've read are on this list. We noticed, by the way, that in the last list of 30 great books that appeared in the paper just about a month ago, that in the integrated liberal studies curriculum, we teach all 30 of them. And incidentally, about 12 or 15 of them are included in this course, from the Bible to John Stuart Mill's On Liberty to Karl Marx's Kapital, and so forth. So, in a way, whatever people's specialties have been, whether they've been doctors or lawyers or in business or public affairs, for at least the last 100 years, there's been assumption that they would understand this language, that this has been the language of educated people, that these are the symbols and the images and the works and the ideas that they share, that somehow hold Western civilization together and make it possible for us to communicate with one another on the same subjects. Now, that's one of the points of the course then. I mean, it's a way of becoming liberally educated. And I suppose even in the most superficial sense, one of the things you get from a course like this is the ability to go into a conversation and to begin it and say, well, as Aristotle said. And then you feel, that you really have arrived and you are educated and so forth. Now, in some trivial sense, that may be the purpose of a liberal arts education, to toss off names of that kind. But there's a deeper purpose to the course, and I think I'd put it this way, by making a distinction between education and training. Now, you can be trained to manage a store, but an educated person understands the principles of the free enterprise system, how it operates, what the idea of the market is all about. A policeman can be trained to read people their rights before making an arrest. An educated person knows the theory behind individual rights, how we create them and how we define them. A person can be trained to obey the rules and traditions of a church. An educated person knows the tradition and the basis of his or her beliefs, why these rules, why these practices exist. It's the same in anything. In working on an automobile, for example, you can be trained by somebody just to follow 10 steps. And in the modern world, I guess increasingly, we're trying to standardize all skills, and so that the unskilled can do highly skilled work. So what you do is you just give a person a checklist. When you're replacing the electric fuel injection system on a car, the modern mechanic, the mechanic who is trained by GM or Ford, frequently just goes down a list of things that he's expected to do and follows a standard operating procedure to do it. But you can only be a good mechanic if you understand the theory behind an automobile, if you understand how the internal combustion engine works, if you can somehow put yourself in the mind of the automobile designer, if you can look inside a car you've never seen before and say, oh, I think I see what they had in mind by putting, that piece there, or by mounting this section in a transverse way rather than an orderly way. Well, the idea behind this course, then, is very much like learning auto mechanics by understanding the theory of the automobile. It's learning how you might someday want to manage a company or participate in government, not just by somebody telling you how to win an election or how to sell real estate, but by understanding the theory behind government, the theory behind the economy. And in a sense, what this means to understand the theory behind our society is to understand the reasons, the thinking behind our beliefs and values. We teach this historically because that's the best way to learn it. because our ideas and our values and our theory grew out of a long process of inquiry and deliberation that is by no means finished yet. Well, as we go through this, as you study each thinker or school of thought then, we will ask you to do three things. And this is going to be the heart of your active participation in the learning process. It's what we'll emphasize in the discussion sections. And for those of you who are participating in this course through the radio at home, you can be thinking about it too as we go through each of these thinkers at each of these schools of thought. So the first object of the course is to understand the theory or the thinker. In a sense, what you should be able to do at the end of this course is to be able to identify different modes of reasoning, to be able to say, that's a Platonic argument, that's a liberal argument, that's a utilitarian argument, that's a Marxist argument, that's an Aristotelian argument. Now, to do this is a process of simplification. You'll be reading very complex books, very elaborate books, but what you're looking for, quite honestly, is a simplification of them. You want to get the main idea behind Plato. It'll be the forms. Once you understand Plato's idea of the forms, you can do a lot with it. Once you understand Aristotle's idea of growth, you can do a lot with it. Once you understand, when we get to the liberalism in the second semester, the idea of the social contract, you can do a lot with it. So you'll be looking for these central themes, and Alan and David will be helping you to look for these themes and to be able to get a clear picture of what holds the theory together. Now that's what I mean by understanding the theory. Another way to put it is to say that we are going to try to ask you at some point to be able to bring back, to sort of say, this is what a Platonist would say. This is what an Aristotelian would say. This is what a liberal would say, and so on throughout the course, just so you know what these arguments are and what stands for them. Now, the second objective that you should be looking for in working with this course is to develop your own reaction to the theory, to deliberate the theory. Because part of the purpose of this course is that you begin to formulate your own political and economic philosophy, your very own, not one that you buy ready-made off the stand of potential ideas that are for sale in the magazines or for sale by political candidates and so forth. Instead, the idea is to give you a start. And you do this by looking at these theories and asking, how far do you accept them and how far do you reject them? But most importantly, why do you accept them? Why do you reject them? And what we'll be doing over and over again is asking you to give reasons. If you are not satisfied with Plato, why not? And once you've said why not, we're going to push you a little further and say, well, doesn't it add up to you that a person might plausibly believe this? And then you have to say, yes, but I don't believe it on this ground. It's out of that process of criticism and argument, of affirmation and denial, but always giving reasons, always giving arguments, always giving support, that you begin to find to construct your own ideas and your own ideals. Now, in this sense, it's rather important that you try on the thought of each thinker or school of thought. And one of the things I'm going to do in my lectures is to present the best case I can for every thinker. I'm never going to give a criticism. What I want to do is that for 2 weeks you will think as though you were Plato. And you'll walk out of the room and walk down the hill and say, yeah, I am a Platonist. I finally found out who I really am and what I believe in, after all this time of looking around. And then 4 weeks later you'll say, whoops, I don't think I'm a Platonist. I'm really an Aristotelian. And by the end of this, in the middle of the second semester, for 3 weeks you're going to be a Marxist. And, watch. That's a bet. I bet you will honestly think for some moment, yes, I think I can be a Marxist. And so on. Through the course, one philosophy at a time, we'll try to persuade you of it to the point that, that you believe it for a period. And as these unfold before you, you'll have to ask, now, what happened to me? Why was I persuaded of that last week, and why do I believe something else this week? Now, the third object of the course, and we'll pursue this somewhat more sporadically in sections, but we want you to pursue it as much as you can on your own, is to ask you to apply these theories to practice, to ask how Aristotle might react to the question of women's rights, to ask how Marx would react to some of the questions before us, to use these philosophies to analyze contemporary problems. And this, I suppose, is the practical side of the course. Now, we hope that the course will help you to see what it takes to make a reasoned decision on public affairs, something you can apply to positions of leadership or management, or even to discussing politics or economics in your role as citizen or just among friends. And the key to this whole operation is the giving of reasons. Anyone can have an opinion. And in fact, your high school teachers taught you to have an opinion, and they were just so delighted if you could say anything. If you could say, I think I'm in favor of equal rights. Now that's wonderful at a high school level, But even a parrot can have an opinion. I mean, after all, when you think about it. The difference between an opinion and a judgment is that a judgment has support. A judgment has a justification that follows it. You can give good reasons for it, and not any reason will do in justifying a decision that has of a political economic character. Now let me show you what I mean. What kind of reasons can we give to support our judgments, our opinions, and so on? Consider, for example, the view, if I were to ask you, are you in favor of legalized abortion, or do you believe that abortion should not be legal? And let's say you said that you did not believe in legalized abortion, and I asked you why. Just a simple question, why? Now, one reason you might give me, you might look at me and say, well, gee, I guess it was because I was raised a Catholic. Now, think about that for a moment. That's a reason. It's an explanation, though. You're telling me I was indoctrinated, I was brought up that way, that must be why I believe in it. But that's not a justification. An explanation is not the same as a justification. To tell me, the word why is a little ambiguous here. Because why, on the one hand, means why do you believe that? In the sense of give me an explanation of why you believe it. Why were you influenced to believe it? But it also means give me good reasons why I should believe it too. Now, the latter question is a philosophical question. The former question is a social science question. We will leave the social science questions aside in this class. We will ask philosophical questions. We want justifications, not explanations. We don't care how you were influenced or brought up or predetermined. So, giving reasons of your prejudices, giving reasons of your predispositions or your inheritance are not good reasons. They're not public reasons. They don't give any reason why other people should support you. If you were in a decision-making position, and somebody said, do you favor legalized abortion? And you said, no, because I was raised a Catholic, it wouldn't cut any ice. Now, the second kind of reason you can give is a reason of self-interest. Why are you in favor of reduced taxes? Well, because I come from a fairly wealthy family, and I think we'd be able to... Now, that's a wonderfully honest answer. And you suspect that a lot of people actually should be giving an answer of that kind. But there's a difference between reasons and motives. Your motives can be your own. And let's just assume among us that all people are seeking, to some extent or another, to fulfill their self-interest. But to argue from self-interest is not a good reason for a public judgment, a judgment on public affairs. You can, to argue you're in favor of equal rights. Why are you in favor of equal rights? Because I am a woman. Well, there's another conversation stopper right there. Yes, we know you have an interest in it. But why would it be good public policy to have equal rights for women? Well, the third kind of reason you can give is one of emotion. You can argue, well, gee, I feel sympathetic for those people, or, my heart bleeds for them, or these people really touch, the plight of the poor really touches my heart. Now, that sounds like a better reason. But when you think of it, you have no right, if in a position of leadership or management, to impose on others your views of what is, of who you personally feel sympathy for. If you're, for example, the president of a corporation, well, if you're the president of a fraternity, and a collection of money has been taken up for a beer party of all things, and you go and, you know, your fraternity brothers or your sorority sisters come to you and someday and say, well, we're ready for the party. Where's the money? And you say, gee, I gave that all to charity. Now think about it for a moment. You know, you had no right to do that. You had no authority to do that. Treating people that you feel sympathy for, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, and so forth, in a better way than anybody else, is often a corrupt way of proceeding. The problem in a society like ours is to convert compassion into justice. And that movement from compassion, from an emotional feeling to a principled feeling, is often a very difficult one to make, and that's where the problem comes in. Well, the fourth ground that you can make a decision on is one of principle. You can say that you decided as you did because of considerations of justice, or human freedom, or human equality, or human rights, or the will of the majority, or efficiency, social efficiency of some kind or another. Now, these seem like big, abstract words, and we use them in political rhetoric, and they seem to lose all their meaning. But in the end, it's talk about those words, and using them as hard steel chisels to distinguish good from bad arguments. That is what political deliberation, political argument, economic discussion is pretty much all about. Now, the classic philosophers were concerned about these principles. They kept asking questions like, what do we mean by justice? What do we mean when we use the word that something is or is not in the public interest? What do we mean by individual rights? They studied the basic values of public life, of politics and law and economics. And we will study them too. And you may grow impatient with this at first, because you'll say, Plato keeps asking, what is justice? Well, what a philosopher's question this is. And yet, what are we talking about in our presidential campaign? But various conceptions of fairness, which is just another word for justice. Unless you make up your mind about what justice means at some level, how in the dickens are you going to vote as a citizen in any way whatsoever? Now, the ancient philosophers, as we will see very shortly, were particularly interested in the human moral capacity. They were fascinated that we are the only creatures, apparently, in the universe that make judgments of right and wrong, good and bad, just and unjust. We're pretty sure that fish can think, and we've got a pretty good idea that dogs are intelligent, but that moral capacity is weird. Now think about that for a moment. How do you do that? I mean, if I were to stand up here and I'd say, okay, you're all going to take 3 exams in this course, but you, I say, picking somebody out at random, are going to take 4 exams. And you'd look at me and you'd say, why? And I'd say, well, you know, you just are. And, and something would happen to you. Even before you found the word, that's unfair, there'd be a deep visceral reaction in you. And the rest of you would be feeling it too. And you'd say, well, you're picking on her. You know, what's wrong with you? This is unfair. This is unjust. It's an emotion. It's an instinct. It's not just something you've reasoned out. You'd find the rational. You'd find out why it's unfair afterwards. But there's a sense of injustice that's prior to that. Well, you know, you can all feel it a little bit. But then if I said, well, she's taking the course for honors, and so she's got to write 4 papers, to say, oh, now I understand. But if I said, well, I think I've changed my mind about that, she'll get honors credit, but she'll do the same work as everybody else, right? Would that be okay? And I can see it again already. You don't know why yet there's something wrong with that, but you know instinctively that would be unfair or unjust. Now, how did you do that? You haven't learned, any theories of justice at all yet. How did you manage to tell in those 2 rather refined situations that there was something wrong with them? As I say, the ancient philosophers were fascinated by our capacity to do that at all. And in a sense, we've lost that fascination. We live in an age of relativism. We say everybody's entitled to their own values. You can't prove what's just or unjust. Therefore, if you think something's just, that's your opinion. Somebody else thinks something's just, that's their opinion. Let's take a vote on the whole subject. It's interesting, we, the moderns, are very interested in people's intelligence, in how smart they are, and how they can solve problems or equations. But we've lost our fascination for this other very human dimension, the dimension and the capacity to make moral judgments, which are also, by the way, political and economic judgments. Now, in the first semester particularly, we're going to try to recapture the ancient sense that the moral sense of man should be studied and thought about seriously. So we're going to talk about how Plato, Aristotle, and others tried to come to conclusions about what justice, the public interest means, what right and wrong mean. In the end, you may or may not be persuaded that it is possible to find answers to those questions, but it is important to ask them. In the end, that we shall see, this is pretty much what political and economic reasoning is all about. Now, let's talk about how we're going to do this in a practical way, and you can look at the syllabus for a moment. Incidentally, those of you who are listening on the radio, if you'd like a copy of the syllabus for this course, you may get one in one of two ways. You may write for a copy of the syllabus from the Department of Integrated Liberal Studies at 228 North Charter Street, Madison, Wisconsin, 53706. That's the Department of Integrated Liberal Studies, 228 North Charter Street, Madison, Wisconsin, 53706. Or you may write to WHA Radio, the College of the Air, Vilas Communication Hall, University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, 53706. And now, as I talk about the books a little bit, I should mention that the great classics that we'll read are available in every small-town library. I'm sure you'll have no difficulty getting them, but the basic textbook for the course is one you may want to write down, because this one you may have to order from the publisher. So the basic textbook is a book by John Beatty, B-E-A-T-T-Y, and Oliver Johnson, J-O-H-N-S-O-N, and it's called The Heritage of Western Civilization. It's published by Prentice Hall Incorporated of Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. You can buy this at the University Bookstore or Brown's Bookshop in Madison. And there are two volumes of this work. We will use the first volume in the first semester, the second volume in the second semester. Since those of you who are listening to this on radio will be hearing this in January, there should be abundant used copies of volume 1 of this book, which was used in the first semester, available for purchase. Now, the basic text, as I say, is Beatty and Johnson, The Heritage of Western Civilization. And on the right-hand column of the syllabus, you'll see the readings that we'll do from this. For next time, we'd like you to start right out in Beatty and Johnson, reading pieces from the 3 civilizations we'll consider next time, which are the Hymn to the Sun, representing ancient Egypt, the Code of Hammurabi, representing ancient Babylon, Mesopotamia, and then the short excerpts from Genesis, Exodus, the book of Kings, and Isaiah, representing some of the political and economic thought of ancient Israel. Please come to the discussion sections having read that, and your discussion section leaders may want to help you focus on this. Then we're going to read 3 really great books. Plato's Republic. You will probably always remember this, and you will probably read Plato's Republic 3 or 4 times in your life if you're at all intelligent. It is really, truly one of the great books of all time, and we'll take you through that. You will be so charmed and fascinated by that I promise. The Republic by Plato. We will also read a book by Aristotle called the Nicomachean Ethics. You can almost graduate from college if you can pronounce it. The Nicomachean Ethics. Nicomachean, you can also pronounce it if you wish to. It is not Aristotle's greatest work. That is the Politics. The Politics is very dull reading. The Ethics is very interesting reading, and you'll enjoy that. And then Machiavelli's The Prince. And we will take you through each of these books step by step, both in lecture and in discussion, for their meaning is not self-evident. We will try to teach you how to read a classic book. Now, on the discussion sections, again, in the discussions, we will be focusing on the 3 questions I suggested earlier that form the heart of the course. Do you understand the theory? What is your reaction to the theory? How do you apply the theory? And in the old Vince Lombardi style of teaching, we will have you just doing that over and over and over again until you learn how to do that. You know, we start with fundamentals, we start with the foundations. Incidentally, some of you asked me, often one or two of you asked me from time to time whether I'd done any research on Plato and Aristotle or written any books or anything, and I think it's time to make a confession to you, which is that I'm not a specialist in the history of political or economic thought. I'm no philosopher, and I've never written a book or an article on Plato or Aristotle or any of the history of political theory. My professional life is really as a contemporary political economist, and I've written about the economic development of less developed nations, Latin American agrarian reform. I've written about industrial policies in advanced societies, airline deregulation. At the moment, I write mostly on contemporary political economic theory, on the relationship of government to business and government to the economy. So